Okay, now that we have exam 4 behind us, it's time to start looking ahead towards the final. All right, so it's one of the later exams. It's going to be on Thursday of finals week. So have your computers fixed. Don't get COVID. Everybody's going to have to take it by Respondus. If you want to take it before Thursday, that's fine with me. Obviously, taking it after Thursday is going to present more problems because we start to run into some deadlines there. So if you want to take it early, by all means, set that up with me, and I don't have a problem with that. But otherwise, we are all going to try to take it at the same time, 10 o'clock on that Thursday. All right, so I'm going to post these PowerPoints along with the rest of the chapter 19 material on the gram-positive bacilli. All right, so I don't have the final totally fine-tuned yet. I'm getting closer to that, but I plan to have 3 different parts to the final exam. I would suggest that you spend most of your time studying our new material. So the 2 weeks here after Thanksgiving, what we cover in lecture, actually starting with Streptococcus, so that was the lecture that I gave online the Thursday before Thanksgiving, the Thursday before Thanksgiving. That will be included as well as the last 2 weeks of your virtual lectures. All right, so this will be very similar, not quite as long as a normal exam over those pathogens. And let me talk about that material a little bit first and come back to the rest. This is what I plan to cover on that exam. So we've got some bacterial pathogens and their diseases. So we already did Streptococcus, Bacillus. I'm going to just be covering anthrax, and that's pretty much the only pathogenic bacillus, or the most famous one anyway. Clostridium, we're only going to be looking at one, and that's C. diff. The Mycobacterium, those are our acid-fast bacteria, and we're going to zone in on tuberculosis in particular. The Neisseria are gram-negative cocci. Most famous ones there are the organisms that cause gonorrhea and meningococcal meningitis. And then Bordetella is called a coccobacillus, so it's kind of somewhere between a cocci and a bacillus. It's also gram-negative. It causes whooping cough. That got cut off there. Okay, so that's our bacterial pathogens, and I really kind of pick and choose each semester, see what we have time for, see what's kind of most interesting at the time. Especially the viral diseases, sometimes I will switch that out. Years that Ebola was in the news, we talked about Ebola. Last year, measles was a big thing. This year, I mean, we're all kind of coronavirus to death, but I'll talk a little bit about some of the historical significance there, how we got to this point. I anticipated that being kind of a short section, but we'll see what's going on with the vaccines in a couple weeks there. I spend almost a whole lecture on herpes virus because there's a lot of different infections that that virus causes. And then a lecture on the RNA viruses. And again, I just kind of had to pick and choose. Flu is always a good one. HIV is very interesting as well. So that's kind of where we're heading lecture-wise. Of course, I'll be recording all these lectures. I plan to put out a schedule. So, hey, if you want to stay on schedule, make sure you're watching these lectures by this day, these lectures by this day. If I get ahead of things, then you kind of see where you need to be to make sure that you're keeping up. Okay. Mostly I end up kind of talking a lot about a lot of interesting things about these pathogens. It kind of varies by pathogen, but you want to keep in mind, in particular, the morphology and the gram reaction. So kind of the first thing, okay, is this a gram-positive cocci, or is it a RNA negative sense, single-stranded RNA virus? Just kind of the basic info about the pathogen. What kind of diseases does it cause? What are some interesting signs and symptoms of those infections? Probably what would be least familiar to you are the virulence factors. So what makes that pathogen successful in causing an infection? Do we have ways to treat it? And I'm not typically looking for which antibiotic do we use, unless there's really only one that we go to. For the most part, that probably changes from time to time. So I might throw out, oh, we might use this or this, but that's typically, can we use antibiotics? Does that do any good? Of course, for our viruses, do we have any other options? And is there a vaccine? So if we have a vaccine for that infection, what's the name of it? Is it any good? That type of thing. Okay, so that's, again, the part of the final that will be new material. And then the cumulative material. So I know this is the part that has, everybody cringe. We've had a lot of content in this class. I would recommend that maybe you don't spend a whole lot of time. I would, again, focus most of your efforts making sure you have this kind of new material down pat. We have a small portion of the exam is going to be multiple choice from the whole semester. This may end up being a little bit less. Typically, we have some assessment questions that all of us that teach this class have to ask in this part, and we are not doing that this semester. So some of those questions maybe that I don't particularly like, I'm just going to leave off. So it may end up being a little bit less than 30 questions, and I can kind of help you think about what to study there a little bit more carefully. All right, so I'll just tell you a few areas that I'm going to stay away with. You don't need to review kind of those historical figures. I won't ask about that. And we had a lot of terminology from chapter 12, no names of asexual spores, a lot of terminology, mycelium, aseptate hyphae. Okay, I'm going to try to stay away from that fungal terminology. I'm not going to ask about mechanisms of specific antibiotics. I might ask you something in general like, what does it mean if something's acid label, if an antibiotic is acid label, or maybe some of the terminology with antibiotics, just kind of general, how do we use them type of questions. Again, not specific antibiotics or mechanisms, or I won't ask you specific antimicrobial chemicals. So, your glyceraldehydes or your hydrogen peroxide. I won't ask specific things there. If you do go back and review a little bit, I would suggest that you pick one of these or these 4 chapters to review. Chapter 3, remember, those are our cell structures, and a lot of those we have talked about other times throughout the course. Certainly the cell wall we've spent a lot of time on. So, maybe brush up on some of those structures. The metabolism, kind of general type things about metabolism. The genetics, go back and keep straight, replication, transcription, translation for sure. And you have been studying adaptive immunity already, so that should be fresh in your mind. So again, just trying to help you kind of target what to study there. And the last part of the cumulative material, which is actually the biggest part of the exam, is matching terminology. So these could be terms throughout the semester. No, I'm not going to give you a list of terms to study. Sometimes it's helpful to go to the end of the chapters. They have terms kind of in bold where they've kind of, in the textbook, reviewed the chapter. But this is really the easiest part. This is the portion of the exam that sometimes brings people's grades up a whole letter grade. And I'm going to give you a little practice. I actually wasn't sure if I was going to be able to pull this off because obviously in a written test, it's easy to do matching. I would have like 3 or 4 pages Each page would have maybe 12 to 15 terms on it. And these are not, so I wouldn't, how to say this, there are terms from the whole semester. So you have very disparate things that you're matching descriptors to. So prion, for example, versus anaerobic respiration, right? Those are two totally different things. So there may be, oh, do you know the difference between anaerobic respiration and aerobic respiration or something like that? But it wouldn't be like, oh, 6 or 7 things that are almost the same and I have to remember exactly which is which. That's not what happens. So I'm gonna post an example of this. I almost have that finished. And I'd like everybody to take a look at that. It's going to show up on Blackboard, but don't worry, that's not going to count towards your grade. It's just, oh yeah, look, it's submitted and I did it right. It's a little bit different the way I've worked out how to do this. It will have a term like, say, plasmid, and then it will have a little drop-down box with an arrow, and you hit that arrow and it'll show you like 12 or 13 different descriptors. So, you pick that one. Obviously, when you're doing this in pen and paper, then you can scratch that one out. So I've told you in the instructions actually that you will only use the term once, and then I give you an extra one. All right, so you'll use it once or not at all. So unfortunately, when you're doing this online, you can't, scratch out the one that you've used already. So that's definitely the negative with this. But again, just take a look at that. I think it's actually a pretty slick system to do that. And so I'd encourage you to do that. All right, so just let me know if you have any questions or concerns about the final. I will post this information with some of your lecture material coming up here in case you want to look at it again.